Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Sunday, October 18th, 10 a.m. Central, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Well, it's Sunday, and that means it's Rules Retrospective Day. We're looking up some stuff in the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, specifically spellcasting during melee. It's not a huge section, but it's one that I think people tend to interpret in a number of ways, or at the least play differently. Interpret might be the wrong word. Maybe it's just that they read and reject certain ways of running the rules. In this case, these are the rules for spellcasting during melee. They're on page 65 of the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. So let's have a look. These functions are fully detailed in the player's handbook. Well, that is to say, spellcasting in general is detailed in the player's handbook. So we've got that going for us. Their commencement is dictated by initiative determination, as with other attack forms, but their culmination is subject to the stated casting time. Both commencement and or completion can occur simultaneously with missile discharge, magic device attack, and or turning undead. Being struck by something during casting will spoil the spell. Boy, right up until turning undead, it sounded like a very clinical description. Being struck by something during casting will spoil the spell. So until the spell goes off, and this is the crux of the whole thing right here, until the spell completes, it can be spoiled by being interrupted. Let's see how little it takes to interrupt a spell. Spellcasters will always insist that they are able to use their powers during combat melee. The DM must adjudicate the success of such use. Consider this. The somatic movement portions of a spell must be begun and completed without interruption in a clean, smooth motion. The spell as a whole must be continuous and uninterrupted from beginning to end. So it includes the somatic portions and the verbal portions. Once interrupted for any reason whatsoever, the spell is spoiled and lost, just as if used. Now, here's something I think that's important. If, when I'm running a game, I determine that a spell hasn't even been started and someone's been hit, then I don't let them cast the spell, but I don't have it expended. I don't consider it spoiled so much as not yet used. But if they've been hit during a round, it's just I adjudicate it as if, well, they can't even get it started. If they tried to get it started after that, I consider that a no, a non-starter, because they have been hit. They are thrown off their, because they had intended to cast. They are thrown off their concentration. Perhaps they're bleeding. They're in pain. All of this could spoil the spell before it's even being cast, right? So if they launch into something and then wince or flinch because they're a twinge of pain as they're doing their movements, um, or their focus goes off and they skip a beat between syllables while casting the spell. All of these things, getting hit earlier in the round, could affect the spell if they continue to try. If they continued with the intention to cast it and then begin casting it after being hit that round. By the following round, so as not to completely nerf the class, I consider that they will have recovered enough composure by then, even if they were severely injured, to cast a spell. They are trained individuals. I just feel like if they're hit during a round when they intended to cast, lose the spell. However, because I'm being generous, if they're actually hit during the succession of initiative prior to even beginning the spell, I don't make them wipe the spell from their books. That, to me, seems like a reasonable boon to give to spellcasters. If we're going to require that they state their intention before melee begins, well then, those who are doing melee could target them even prior to them beginning to cast, if they're far enough back in the initiative order, knowing that they had stated their intention, basically metagame their way toward preventing someone from, well, that would prevent them from casting a spell. It seems too big a penalty to then have them wipe out a spell from their memory that they hadn't even begun trying to cast. So it says spoil a spell. And it says also that the spoiling of the spell happens if they're interrupted. If they haven't even begun, it doesn't seem fair to take it away from them. That's my point. Let's continue. Once interrupted for any reason, the spell is spoiled and lost, just as if used. Spells cannot be cast while violently moving, such as running, dodging a blow, or even walking normally. They are, why use the word violently if walking normally? We got little adverb conflict there. We get the point, though. They are interrupted by a successful hit, be it a blow, missile, or appropriate spell, not saved against or savable against. Thus, so really just any of those things. So if walking normally can throw off your spell casting, can't giving you a shove and making you off balance, teeter backwards a couple of steps, that's more violent than walking normally, in that you've been pushed, you weren't the initiator of that movement, somebody else was, so you don't have that, you don't know how hard you were going to be pushed or whatever when you are pushed. I would say, yeah, somebody bumps into you, somebody puts you off balance in any way, that should spoil a spell or keep you from casting it, as I stated before. Thus, casting a spell requires that a figure be relatively motionless and concentrating on the effort during the entire course of uninterrupted casting. For example, A magic user casting a fireball must be in sight of the intended area of effect during the course of the spell, although, as an associate, could be there to open a door intervening between the caster and the target area at the appropriate time, provided the timing was correct, of course. That is to say, when I get halfway through this spell, I want you to open that door because I'm going to throw it in that room. Interesting, tricky. It assumes the person who's going to be opening the door has an understanding of when halfway through the spell is. What is it that costs? Now maybe it's another magic user who knows spells. But what if they have trouble opening the door? Now, see, there's another thing. What if the door never gets opened? Does the spell go off? The caster cannot begin a spell, interrupt it just prior to completion, run to a different area, and then complete the spell. Interruption instantly cancels it. Unless a spell has no somatic components, the caster cannot be crouching, let alone prone, during casting. That's a lot. Got to be standing upright. Got to be continuous. I think the assumption here, too, is that if the guy doesn't get the door open, you can interrupt your own spell. You simply don't complete the movements. And if you thus did not continuously and cleanly perform the somatic movements, the somatic components of the spell, the movements of the spell, then you would be self-interrupting the spell, which, why not, right? Disability overload. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? Just doing a little, right on. Just doing a little, what's the thing here? Spellcasting during melee. We're going through the DMG section on that and talking about how it plays out in game. Of course, unless a spell has no somatic components, caster cannot be crouching, let alone prone, during casting. It can thus be understood that the spell casting during melee can be a tricky business, for a mere shove at any time can spoil the Dwemer. Any spell can be attempted, but success is likely to be uncertain. Use the following procedure for spells cast during melee. Number 1. Spellcasters must note what spell they intend to cast at the beginning of each round prior to any knowledge of which side has initiative. I don't do that. Here's a place where I diverge from the rules, from the guidelines. I require spellcasters to say they intend to cast a spell. I don't require them to follow through on it, although they can't cast a spell unless they state that prior to initiative being determined. And because of that, they can change out to another spell. Now, see, what's the point of this? Well, perhaps for Gary, the point of this was to create a situation where a spellcaster needs to be prepared, where a spellcaster's spell can be foiled because they said they were going to throw one, they stated what it was, they didn't throw it, boom, you lose the spell. Perhaps that was all the intention there. For me, having them state that they're going to cast a spell at the beginning of when we determine initiative, before we roll, The effect for me, the helpful thing for me, what makes it a useful thing to do for me as a DM, is that they're opening their book and looking up the spell and deciding whether it's something they should cast. And once they get in the groove of knowing they have to state that they're casting before initiative is rolled, they're probably looking up the spell during the last round and getting it ready and deciding whether they even want to cast in the first place. So they're preparing ahead of time for something that traditionally, if you don't do this, can really slow a game down. So I like to derive the benefit from this guideline in that regard. I'm not looking to penalize players. I think it's tough enough playing spellcasters. I'm not interested in foiling, spoiling, soiling their spells in any way. Sideline, there was a thread on Facebook about wishes in one of the groups. Somebody was saying, how badly do you twist them? Do you always twist them? Do you look to twist them as a DM? And my response was, and they said that their player in this case was a magic user with a 9 intelligence who wanted to wish to have it go up to 10. First of all, that's a kind of a non-issue, right? I mean, 9 or 10, it doesn't really matter. They're a crap magic user to begin with, so I don't know what they're really getting out of how they got to the point where they could cast a wish like that in the first place, or even if they're not casting it, how they would get to a point where they've achieved enough wealth that they could afford to have somebody else cast it. I don't know. There's a lot of real red flags in that whole thing there. They mostly have something to do with the dungeon master, in my opinion. But nevertheless, my point was let him cast it. It's a 9th level spell. It should be pretty powerful. Look at the other 9th level spells. If you throw some other 9th level spell, there's a great effect that's going to happen. It does say you should be careful not to let wishes unbalance a game, so I can't cast a wish and kill your character with it. I wish your character was dead. Boom, dead. Okay. Nah, because it takes a certain amount of fun out of it for other players. I'm not sure that's a good idea, first off. But also, it's super, super powerful. Is it more powerful than, do you get a saving throw? If you don't even get a saving throw, that's pretty powerful. But my point was, don't let it get unbalanced the other way. If I cast a wish and it's less powerful, has less of an effect on the game than a first level fighter swinging a sword, or a low level cleric turning undead, if my casting of a wish is less powerful effectively than those kind of things, then how is this a 9th level spell? So, in most cases, I think wishes should work as desired by the caster, by the wisher. Even if they stumble a bit in the wording, don't hold people's feet to the fire. They don't live in the skin of that character 24/7 and in that world in actuality. They're taking a break from their regular life to spend 3 or 4 hours pretending to be this elf or wizard or whatever you want to say. Let them be that. Let them be that for a little while. Let them enjoy it. If something is outrageous, like I want to kill that character, twist it like, okay, he's dead to you. How's that work? I want him to be dead. Okay, he's dead to you. So now, for all intents and purposes, nothing about that character is known or affects the person who made the wish. They can't see them. They can't, like a dead like me scenario where this character's going to be there. For everybody else in the world, that character exists. And when this guy says, what are you talking about? Who are you talking to? When he doesn't, right? Everybody thinks this guy's got a problem. The wisher, not the person who can't be seen by this guy, because they can all see this person who can't be seen by this guy. So there's a way of twisting that in a way that kind of honors the wish, but complicates the game, I guess, a great deal for this character, and maybe not for others. Anyway, it's a fun little way. Hey, Alexfire, how you doing, George? Good to see you. We got spellcasting during melee. Let's go on to number 2. Attacks directed at spellcasters will come on that segment of the round shown on the opponent's or on their own side initiative dice, whichever is applicable. If the spellcaster's side won initiative with a roll of 5, the attack must come then, not on the opponent's losing of 4 or less. Thus, all such attacks will occur on the first to sixth segment of the round. 3. Intelligent monsters able to recognize the danger of spells will direct attacks against spellcasters if not engaged by other opponents, so as to be prevented from doing so. Again, this goes back to what I said earlier about declaring your intention to cast a spell. If you don't even start the spell prior to when those intelligent monsters able to recognize the danger of spells get their attacks, if you haven't started a spell, they shouldn't be able to attack you based on the fact that you intended to cast a spell this round. If you haven't even started it, there's no sign that you are spellcasting. 4. The spellcaster cannot use his or her... let's back up. That is also to say that you are just one of the random targets. So if the creature is still going to randomly target somebody for an attack, you can be in that pool. You're just not going to be given preference as a target because of spellcasting if you haven't actually started casting the spell. The spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during spellcasting. Doing so interrupts the spell. Any successful attack or non-saved against attack upon the spellcaster interrupts the spell. Because spellcasting will be so difficult, most magic users and clerics will opt to use magical devices whenever possible, wands, rods, stabs, and the like, or potions, if they are wise. If they are wise. Well, that's really if the player is wise, right? Spellcasting during melee. I guess magical device attacks effect on... These are other portions. They're not really what we're talking about today. We can dig into that stuff at a later date, at another time. Mark, how do you handle the NPCs knowing who is casting? Yeah. Are the NPCs seeing casting, like motion, components being pulled out, etc.? Yeah, all spells in first edition have a somatic, a movement component. They all have verbal components. It's the nature of first edition, right? And you have to... I require spellcasters to state that they intend to cast a spell prior to initiative being rolled. Unlike the guidelines, I don't require that they tell me what spell they're going to cast. If in the initiative order the monsters go before the player characters, then the player character hasn't even begun casting. If, however, initiative order dictates that the player characters are going to be going ahead of the creatures, monsters, whatever, and the spell has enough of a casting time that completion of that spell won't happen in initiative order until after the monsters go, then yes, the monsters could see them casting, and if they're intelligent enough to know that spellcasting can be super dangerous, then they will by all means target the caster over other, because it's a danger that they cannot risk allowing to come to completion. So length of the spell and segments could push the caster into the interrupt area, absolutely. If, however, as I was stating a few moments ago, the PCs lose initiative, then he hasn't even begun casting. How do you know if he's going to be casting a spell or not? You don't, right? So you've got to take that into consideration. You've got to allow the monsters to see what's happening in the moment and to decide to not target specifically a spellcaster who isn't even casting. So they're just another potential target, not one to be keyed on as you would with a monster if a spellcaster has already begun casting a spell, and if the monster is also of an intelligence enough to recognize what's going on and to then attack to try to spoil the spell. So yeah, it's just guidelines to keep in mind when that's happening. It's easy enough to do, I think. Yeah, and these are my own. These are my own determinations. Sometimes these are my own divergences from the guidelines that are in the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rulebooks for running the game. So I try, when I explain how I do things, to point out where it diverges from the rules, and I try to explain why. This is not me trying to talk you into doing it the same way. You'll have your own reasons for why you do things a certain way. When you feel like it's worth diverging from the rules. And these are things that will change over time. You may decide to do things one way, and then after running games for a while and having seen the way things play out during actual games, may decide, you know what, I'm going to tweak that a little bit. I'm going to make an adjustment here because I think this could actually work better if I do it slightly differently than I was doing it. Largely, those determinations are going to be in an effort to make a game run more smoothly, to make it run with a certain pacing in mind. Not that all campaigns have to be fast-paced. There may well be games where you're all sitting around on couches doing theater of the mind stuff in someone's rec room, and you've got hours and hours to kill on a stormy weekend where you had outdoor plans and now they've been quashed, and you're just gonna kick the ball around, as it were, but casually, slowly, and just at an easy pace, without the need for everybody to be all up on around the table and rolling dice and having heavy combats and all of this stuff. We're just doing a little empire building here, or we're doing a little kingdom maintenance this week because we're all of a level where we have strongholds, and now we're, building up the population, or expanding the agriculture, or increasing our ability to trade. These are all different ways of playing a game that don't really require that you keep to a fast, exciting pace. If your game's mainly about combat or about exploration, and you're in a dungeon where things are happening quickly as you move along because there's some time element involved, you get the sands of are flowing through the hourglass, then by all means you may want to make sure that the ways you are interpreting the rules keep to a fairly frenetic pace. So watch for that, and do whatever works for your game in a way that makes it fun for you and the people that are playing. But mainly for you. You're important too. You're a dungeon master. You're a game master. You're a referee. You're a builder of worlds. And if you're not having fun, you know, don't think you can just say, well, all of these guys wanted to do this, so I'm running the game so they have fun. I don't really like it, but nah, get out of that game. At some point, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to realize you don't enjoy the game. You're going to feel obligated to run it through whatever scenarios you're doing, and you're not having fun, and they're not going to wind up having fun. On the flip side, if they're having lots of fun, even though they know you're not having fun, what are you doing? Those aren't your friends. Get the hell away from them as quickly as you can. When it ceases to be fun for the game master should switch gears. Take a break, let someone else take the reins for a while, run a different game, find some other players. Maybe that's part of what's not fun about it is you've become estranged from the players that you're currently with. There are other forces at work that whatever it is. But don't run games you don't enjoy playing. It's just not worth it. Anyhow, that's the rules retrospective today for spell casting during melee. I want to thank everybody who's following the channel, especially if you've chimed in on the stream chat, because good times, right? Lots of fun. Very much enjoy it. I want to make sure I get everybody into... It's been a few weeks since I've seen you. D.O., thanks for coming back. Thanks for following the channel. We'll put you into the list for the following week. I think we got a couple more weeks when we'll be able to do virtual Gamehole Con badges. So we will continue to do that. I will also say, come on back, 10 a.m. tomorrow. That's when we do weekly news and announcements. That's when we announce who won last week's giveaway. On Tuesday, cartography and world building, campaign discussion on Wednesday, GMing tips on Thursday, building adventures on Friday, GM reviews on Saturday, back around the horn to the rules retrospective next Sunday. If you're coming to this through YouTube, thank you so much. Subscribe to the channel. Give a little thumbs up to the videos you watch. We'd appreciate it if you have some constructive criticism. That's what the comment section's for. We'll read them. Please do. Help make the show better. That's always a good thing for us and for everybody else who watches them. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.